Right, a life story is something which is hard to begin with because you really don't know how far you can or you want to go back. I wouldn't say my earliest, but my fairly early recollections begin at primary school at the age of 6 in Hungary, when probably the first time in my life I had experienced racial discrimination on religious ground. Obviously, at the time, it didn't mean that much to me, but nevertheless, it was there. The fact that the admission to the state schooling system has been limited or being proportionate to a certain number or after a certain number of non-Jewish children having been admitted to the school in the proportion thereof 3 Jewish children for every 50 admitted have been also admitted for schooling. On account of that, to start off with, after my primary schooling, which was, the system was normally after 4 classes of primary, you could go to high school at the age of 10, since there were more than 3 very good top-graded Jewish children in primary schools. I somehow missed out, and I had to start my high school a year later on account of discrimination. Right through my early childhood, by that time it was 1940s, early 1940s, I have vivid recollections of my father having been drafted into compulsory military labor from time to time within Hungary for periods up till 6 months in 1940, for instance, and thereafter that more frequently. But the crunch really hasn't come till 1943, when there were serious expressions of serious anti-Semitism within the Hungarian community. I lived in a smaller town of, say, 27,000 people. While it wasn't that noticeable, but nevertheless it was there. Finally, in 1994, early 1994, when the German army overnight, so to speak, occupied Hungary, and a couple of weeks thereafter started to issue orders to round up the entire Jewish population of Hungary. In March or April 1944, we have been forced to leave our own homes and move into a ghetto in my hometown for a short while. From there, obviously, we had to leave all our, most of our possessions behind. Six of us were living in a small room. My father has been taken away for a forced labor camp, and shortly thereafter, at I would say the first week or at the beginning of June, we have been moved from the ghetto of our own hometown to a central collection ghetto, which is obviously far bigger, and early June, from there we have been taken, my mother and myself, an only child, to Auschwitz, which at the time has been unheard or unknown. One would have to say that the level of awareness of children 60 years ago was far, far different, and at a lower level than what it would be today. In every way, politically, socially, economically, we were really children, inexperienced, simple kids. Today's youth at that age, at corresponding age, are no longer children, they are young adults, totally aware in every respect of life around them. Obviously, with the absence of modern communication, news were filtering through. We have heard that there were serious persecutions in Poland already, for that matter. In fact, we have met some Polish people who have managed to flee to Hungary. But all that from a certain distance didn't mean that much to us. However, when finally my mother and I have packed into wagons of wagons designed for 6 horses or 40 people, and 80 of us have been forced into wagons without any possession whatsoever, without given hardly any food apart from a piece of bread and probably a piece of sausage of some kind. My memory serves me well. We have been locked up and transported in the unknown. We have been traveling 3 or 4 days with hardly any food, only water given to us, into the unknown. And even when we arrived, we didn't know where we were. We then have been herded out of the wagons onto a railway siding, and I was holding my mother's hand. We have been made to march along the siding to the fort, to the front of the siding, where an SS officer was standing on a box and with the flick of a finger has been directing people to either one or the other side of the railway siding. And as I said, he beckoned me to one side, my mother to the other side, and that was the only time I have seen my mother alive. At the time, we didn't know what it meant. Separation has happened, yet the reality, the realization of what was going on pardon me, was still unclear until a couple of days later, when myself, with a number of other people, children and adults, have been taken out to ordinary labor, to work which consisted of collecting clothing in the grounds of the crematoria, which at the time the whole concept was totally new to me. We didn't know that such a thing existed as the mechanical disposition of bodies of dead people. And there and then I have seen a heap of corpses, and there I've seen my mother's dead body. And that was the first time when a whole new world opened up to me. And the reality struck me. And for a short while, like everyone else, felt that I was alone in this world at the age of probably 13 and a half. It's needless to go into details regarding the camp life and what has happened on a daily basis. I mean, that is history. It doesn't need my redocumentation of it. However, in spite of daily selection, which is normally known today as mastering, for the sick, the feeble, who could no longer stand on their feet and being taken away to be killed, I have managed to survive in Auschwitz for 17 weeks in view of, I would say, almost daily mastering. 17 weeks later, during a master which consisted of stripping everyone naked, filing past an SS officer at the head of the barrack where we have been accommodated, we have been mustered for physical fitness. If any one of us still had something to offer in ability to carry out some menial work. And when I came up to the officer, who turned out to be no one else but Dr. Joseph Mengele, whom they called the Angel of Death in Auschwitz, he himself felt my little flesh, whatever was still left on my body, and when he felt there was still some ability there, some flesh, that I would be suitable to do some work, he pushed me to the side. I still didn't know what was happening, but adults who knew, they grabbed me, pushed me to the back, and hid me there out of sight until the muster was over. Then they came for those who had been taken out, or left behind rather. The following day, or even I think during the night thereafter, we have been tattooed on our arms, and a day later we were taken away from Auschwitz to another forced labor camp which has been attached to an ammunition factory that was in Gleiwitz. It was partly a part of Poland. There were three, or today in hindsight I believe there were four of these labor camps in Gleiwitz. I was in Gleiwitz number 3. Shortly after my arrival in Gleiwitz, I have become gravely ill due to malnutrition. It was sheer luck that I still appeared to be in a reasonable condition, physical condition in Auschwitz, because a couple of weeks after arrival there, I had what you would call today a general septicemia. My body's immunity has totally disappeared. I had infections upon infections covering all my body, and finally, in the absence of antibiotics at the time, I have been given away to die in the meager camp hospital. There was a small section where they left the dying people behind. And in the camp there was a Czech-born doctor who was working as a refugee also in the camp, in the hospital. I have never met him before, and out of sheer compassion, out of the goodness of his heart, he took pity on me. And in view of my total run-down physical condition due to vitamin deficiencies and malnutrition, he sneaked up to the SS officer's kitchen, and risking his life each and every time he was doing so, he stole from the garbage bin rotting vegetable scraps, potato peelings, and whatever he could get to get some roughage to me, to enable me to survive. And if it wouldn't have been for him, I wouldn't be here today. I somehow managed to survive. That was in September, early October of 1944. Subsequently, after I have been liberated, he has also been liberated. I don't know where, but we have met up in 1946, way back in my home country, in Hungary, where he had some relatives. And when he came to visit Hungary and his relatives in 1946, he made a point of searching for me, and we have met afterwards. However, then I have been working, after I have recovered to a reasonable standard, I have been working in the ammunition factory, electro-welding, sea mines, and we have been sabotaging those works after having welded the closing mechanism of a mine. We have ruined the threads of the closing mechanism so they could not seal the mines properly. And I believe that they did not function. However, that has not been discovered for some time later. In January 1945, due to the approaching Russian front from the east, they started to evacuate all the labor camps in Gleiwitz, and late one morning they gathered the whole camp, and leaving even those little possessions we had behind, we have been force-marched to yet another camp, which was called Blechhammer, and there are a number of people in Sydney who have also been at the same camp. That was probably around the 20th of January, after 2 days and 2 nights of marching, herded and driven by soldiers as the soldiers behind us, and a number of us who could not keep up with the march have been killed on the way. We arrived to Blechhammer, and another 2 days later, on the 23rd of January 1945, in the morning we noticed that all of a sudden there were no more soldiers around. For a short while we didn't know what's happened until we realized that we have been abandoned by the Russian army. They have retreated And for a short while, about a day, we have been in the middle of no man's land. We've heard the shootings, but shootings were coming and going from both sides, so we weren't exactly in the clear as to what was happening. However, when, as I say, there toward the end of the day, we saw foreign soldiers, we assumed to be Russian soldiers, passing by and overrunning, occupying the area where the camp was. We realized that we had been liberated, but at the time, under the circumstances, we, as much as we could not realize and appreciate the significance of having been taken to a camp, it took us some time until the realization sunk in that now we are free. But what does a 14-year-old kid do which he's suddenly regained freedom, which without any possessions, without any sense of belonging, without knowing anybody? The only logical thing appeared to be to do is that myself with another couple of boys, we started to walk back into the direction where we saw the Russians coming. If they are coming from there, that appeared to be the logical thing to do. It took us about 7 days of hitchhiking, walking, whatever, getting a lift from soldiers, civilians. We obviously did not speak the language until we finally managed to get to a large Polish town called Częstochowa, which was an already established collection center for refugees from all over the area. From then, after a couple of weeks, the Russians already have taken us to a town called Slutsk in White Russia. That was a kind of a recovery camp where, in all fairness, we have been taken reasonable care of. And towards the end of, I would say, towards the middle of 1945, through partly already established railway system, we, the 3 boys still together, all of us from Hungary with similar background, managed to make our ways through Romania, a rather long way, and got back to Hungary in about say May or June 1945. I didn't know I knew that my mother wouldn't come back. I had no knowledge of my father. He didn't know anything about me. So through the Red Cross, he was taken to the concentration camp of Mauthausen, where after a serious illness he managed to survive, and also came back to our hometown, which it's called Janjes, which is a rather hard word to spell, and it's not all that significant really, not part of the story. However, I made my way back to Budapest, looked up some former friends who told me that my father was indeed back into our hometown. In fact, they thought that he opened up a small mixed delicatessen business, which we had before obviously not in the same form, but somehow he managed to open up because that was the only occupation he ever had and he ever knew. Now, up till that point, my name was Weissman. I was born as Weissman, and I've been through the concentration camp as Weissman and came back as Weissman. At that point of time, through the miserable but already established communication system in Hungary, I have sent a telegram to my father from the capital, Budapest. Just arrived, will be back Wednesday. But in those days we paid by the number of words, and I didn't have the money, and addressed it to Weissman because there was only one Weissman in our town. However, the telegram has been delivered to a guy called Fleischmann by mistake, who, in spite of the fact that he knew my father, because in a small town, Jews just knew each other. It was a community, like everywhere, it was a community. However, either he forgot or he didn't bother to give him the message. And when I arrived by train, and I had to wait for my free passage because I had no money to buy a ticket with, got back to our hometown, there was a man who knew me from before the war. And he was, and again, after the war, was again driving a horse-drawn carriage to ferry people from the station into the town. And he embraced me and was crying. And when I asked him, what about my father? Your father is already back. He just managed to open the shop. I said, look, something doesn't gel. I have sent my father a telegram. I was coming back home today, and he is not here to wait for me. And then he took me back, took me into the shop, took me home. When I walked into the shop, my father virtually has collapsed. He didn't know I was coming. And that was the time when we decided that we were going to change our name. Not because Weissman was too Germanic or too Jewish or whatever, but just to have a different name. Visontag is a truly Hungarian name. It's a small town, not very far from my hometown. So it was just a matter of picking something different. But it wasn't a matter of trying to distance ourselves from being identified as Jews, far from it. Now, that is the physical history of that part of my life. Subsequently, I have caught up with the year I have missed at high school, then 2 years in one to be able to keep up with my school friends, and in 1949, one nice day, the then Communist Party secretary of our little town walked into my father's shop, asked him for the shop keys, and told him to get out. And that was probably more what one could take, having to start twice in 4 years. And we decided that we just have to go elsewhere and look for greener pastures. Ahead of my father, after having finished my high schooling, school certificate, I jumped the border from Hungary to Czechoslovakia over mountains. And eventually, a week or 10 days later, I have reached again, crossing the border from Czechoslovakia to Austria. I finished up in Vienna. My father and his second wife, whom he married in 1946, and that is a different story. They followed me to Austria, to Vienna. At the time, I had an admission to an American university. However, they were only prepared to give me a visa, but not my father. So at the time, obviously, it was not an option to be considered. And we started to look around where we are going to go, and then as people talk, we have discussed Australia. We didn't know anybody here. And subsequently, we have made an application to the Jewish welfare in Sydney at the time. After 2.5 years in Austria, on the 1st of April 1952, we finally arrived to Australia. Now, as I said before, this is the physical history of that section of my life. However, there is a much deeper and longer history of the emotional healing and adjustment, which probably would form a different part of my life, right? Having to cope with the loss of a mother, having been through everything what I have seen, trying to readjust into normal life, coming to the conclusion that that was done, what has been done, being done by people who are used to live with in the middle of a society, and the very same people stood by and let it all happen. It was something which took a long time. Eventually, after my return, upon my immediate return, for about 3 to 4 weeks, my father didn't ask, and I did not start to talk to him about what's happened to Mum. It was a subject we did not discuss until, let's say, a few weeks later, he finally sat down, "Son, what about Mum?" And then I told him what's happened. But apart from that, I have not really spoken about that part of my life for over 45 years, not even to my own grown-up children, family, or wife. And then came the realization that it's probably not that smart. It might be a certain comfort zone, but it's not really smart if you don't talk about it. How can we expect them and the world around us to learn by it and draw the consequences and see that it should never happen again? And that was the first time when I really made a decision that it is time that I started to talk about it, otherwise it will be lost. Well, from here on, I mean, settling in Australia and what I have been doing after the so-called liberation is yet another story. I don't think that would be an integral part of this process. But if it's of any interest, I can go on with that. Um, Where we take a different perspective for our children.
Yeah, absolutely.
While there are whole libraries already existing, documenting people's individual history during and immediately after the Holocaust, up to the point of liberation. However, there are substantially fewer reports of the process of emotional healing and adjustment, emotional as well as economical recoveries, and the history of them after the war. After we have merely established ourselves in Hungary in 1945, toward the middle of 1945, and my father has scraped up enough to be able to reopen a small mixed business delicatessen, what we today commonly term. In 1945, in 1949, the then Communist Party secretary of our town has walked into his shop, asked him for the shop keys and told him to get out. And that was more than what one could bear under the circumstances, having to start twice in 4 or 5 years. And we made the decision that there wasn't much future to stay in the country. Subsequently, we have made plans somehow to escape and flee Hungary, which I did after having finished my school certificate, and jumping the mountainous region between Hungary and Czechoslovakia. Through Czechoslovakia, I have jumped the border into Czechoslovakia, and about 10 days after I finally made my way, jumping yet another border from Austria, from Czechoslovakia into Austria to Vienna. My father, who in the meantime has remarried with his second wife, followed me sometime later. However, they have not made it at the first attempt. They have been caught at the border, taken back into Hungary. And about 6 months later, during a second attempt, they finally joined me in Vienna. At the time, in 1949, I have been granted a university placement and admission in the United States. However, the U.S. at the time was only prepared to give me a visa and not to my parents, which obviously, after what we have been through, it was not an option to be considered. So, after several inquiries, we have decided that we would come to Australia, and through normal channels we have lodged an application, and through the Jewish Welfare Society we were finally sent landing permits and arrived to Sydney on the 1st of April 1952, after having been for 2.5 years in Austria. It might be a small part to my history that while I have tried to get some work as a musician in Austria, I found it almost impossible until an Austrian newly acquired friend of mine, another musician, told me that it was because there was a visible tattoo on my arm, and it would make all the difference if I had this tattoo taken out. And under the circumstances, that appeared to be the right decision to do just that. I have seen a surgeon who was well versed already in taking the SS Army's tattoos out, and I was told he would do a fine job, so he did, and I had the tattoo removed from my arm. Shortly thereafter, indeed, I had managed to get employment. In 1952, when we came out here to Sydney, through my father's second wife, who inherited a substantial amount of money from a proverbial rich uncle in the United States, and which money we have brought out here for re-establishment, we indeed succeeded and bought a business at King's Cross, where we have stayed for 29 years, also a delicatessen. However, 2.5 years, or not even that, after our arrival here, my father's second wife, due to a stroke, passed away for 4 days, having been unconscious and never came out of the hemorrhage. She passed away without a will. Due to circumstances and part of the original rich uncle's will, that money which she brought over here for re-establishment had to be repaid to the rest of the surviving American family. And as a result of this, my father and I have been working for quite a number of years, 7 days, 12 hours a day, in the business, until we have finally repaid every cent of it. So 4 years later, 5 years later, we have been standing here, back to square one. In fact, we have, so to speak, lost that 5 years, during which people who have migrated at the same time when we did, already managed to get somehow back on their feet. It was still 1957, until we acquitted this debt and again tried to properly establish ourselves. That was the time when I got married. And in a way, our indebtedness held up our marriage date a little while due to certain financial constraints. When I usually talk to younger people today, it seems almost inconceivable that certain conditions today, which are part of their lives, were an absolute luxury in our times. We never had the luxury of parental backings, economic backings in particular. Today's young people, young adults, not so young adults, take it for granted that if things go wrong, they can go home and sort themselves out, whether in a marital partnership or in any other way. In those days, we didn't have this luxury. We were, in a sense, pioneers who came with nothing, and to opt out and get off the bandwagon, so to speak, it was an impossible option. We had to get on with life. We didn't have these luxuries of being able to depend upon one another. In fact, to the point that after the Jewish Welfare Society, having paid for our passage to Australia, as soon as we were in the position, we have started to make repayments and repaid every penny of the money laid out for us to enable them to assist other people. So it was a rather rough ride until we got there when we are. From time to time, I am talking to very young children of 7, 8, 9, 10 years old who are popping the invariable question, and what was life like in your time? And it seems at times it's hard to understand that we used to make our own toys because there was no money for PlayStations and there was no money for expensive toys, which is part and parcel of their lives today. Now, this is the message, what I believe people in a similar age group to mine ought to convey to the children, because the children will be deprived from this opportunity to get a survivors, a pioneers version of how things were, as to say, the way we were. If I look back upon my life after my arrival, that was at the age of 29, 49, 52, 22 years old, and since I fled Hungary after my school certificate, I really had no profession. I have played a number of musical instruments way back from childhood. In fact, I worked casually as a young musician still in Hungary. When I got to Austria, I tried to I tried to work as a musician, but that was not really a profession I was pursuing. When I arrived here, we seriously, my father and I, had to get down to consider trying to re-establish ourselves and what we are going to do, since running a delicatessen shop was the only thing my father has ever known and done. That was the logical thing to do, which we indeed managed to accomplish in late 1952. So I have been working with my father till 1977, when he passed away, and eventually I sold the shop in 29 years afterwards, that in 1981. I thought at the time, well, I was fairly young, but I mean, it's extremely hard work, 29 years. Anyone who has been working in the food business and in a small delicatessen in particular would appreciate what 29 years meant in a delicatessen. I thought at the time that it's about time I would in some way retire or take it a lot easier. And really I was considering retirement. Little did I realize that the age of 52, one is far too young to retire. And a few months after, I was rather restless and fidgety, but still did nothing about it, until one day I met a reasonably old friend of mine, a young friend of mine of old standing, who was working and had a real estate agency business. And he somehow popped the question that he was looking for someone at an age where the person could talk to people younger than his age, people in an older age group, and popped the question, said, look, why don't we have a cup of coffee? Which we did about a week later. One day, he rang me, said, what are you doing? I said, look, I'm at home looking after my garden. I said, listen, why don't we have a cup of coffee tomorrow? So we did. And as a result of this, he asked me whether I would give it a go and go into his business and work there and whatever. I mean, I had some idea about real estate, but not really much. To make a long story short, we told each other, agreed, look, we've been friends for so many years, we'll give each other 3 months, and after 3 months we'll be free to tell how we feel. The 3 months went past without being noticed. It turned out to be 5.5 years. Due to mounting business pressures, the absence of a computer and whatever at the time, I have been involved in the development of a substantial strata management portfolio, which included an increasing number of night meetings, body corporate meetings. So much so that I started to get stress headaches in the early hours of the morning. And I suddenly realized, look, I know it's good, but that's not the way to go, and I'm not locked up in this position. So I explained it to them, and I gave them notice and told them, look, I'll be prepared to stay until you find someone, but I don't think that taking headache tablets morning after morning, 4 o'clock in the morning, is not the right way to go. And I'm ready for a break. We are still the very closest friends with my friends. We have been ever since. After I got out of real estate, well, I thought it would be perhaps really time to retire. That was 5.5 years. I was about 57, 58 years old. About 3 months thereafter, yet another friend of mine, who was a jeweler, asked me, so what are you doing with yourself nowadays? Say nothing much in particular. Say, look, I'm opening up a new business. What about could you consider coming in and helping me in the business? So, look, under the same terms and conditions, after 3 months, we'll be free to tell each other the way we feel, upon which we had agreed, and that turned out to be all of 10 years with them. After 10 years, at the age of 67, I have made a final decision, as what I would normally refer to as my third retirement, that it is really time to retire and want to take just a little bit more time for things I've been wanting to do. I have been rather heavily involved with neighboring ever since 1963, and generally I wanted to have more time to do things I really wanted to do. So in 1967 I have finally retired from paid employment. I have obviously done my homework in jewelry as well as in real estate, and whatever I have learned in the various facets of life have proved to be extremely useful and to date I am drawing on those experiences. For the last, so let's say I was 67 and I have retired. For the last 8 years, I have been giving all my time involved with community projects, still neighborhood, various aspects of charity work, courage to care, and that's about all I wanted to do. I'm still doing it in my own way. I am living a full life. I've got a grown-up family, grandchildren, and I believe that in hindsight, what I have been through, I have achieved a totally and fully satisfied and happy life. And that would bring you up to date with my life. Yeah. You know, there's so many aspects. In the last few years, since Courage to Care has been implemented, and it's one of the most ambitious and rewarding projects which we in B'nai could have started. I am giving an increasing amount of time and attention to trying to further develop not Courage to Care, but the specific message we are trying to convey to our contemporaries age-wise as to the younger generation. To me, Courage to Care and being able to talk to people from all walks of life is a challenge. I am not trying to meet them halfway. I know how they feel. I don't assume much previous knowledge, though I do believe that human nature by birth is good. It is only to various influences or due to the lack of influences that they take the wrong direction. So when I am addressing them, I am trying to make them think and feel my way. I am trying to highlight that there are no differences since we all believe in the one superhuman being. We all have the same backgrounds and a certain commonality in religion. All major and most minor religions cherish the Old Testament, what we call commonly the Bible, which gives no license to anyone to kill. And we express it in the Almighty's answer when Cain has been asking, am I my brother's keeper? Say, yes, we all are. And this is the philosophy, the understanding I am trying to convey to anyone who I meet during Courage to Care. We'll have to try to bring the best out of people. There is a lot of good in human nature. And if we succeed in highlighting that aspect of human nature, that there is no justification to harm one another, certainly not under the pretext and excuse of religion then I believe we have succeeded to break down certain barriers between them. That is in spite of the fact that right through history, more wars have been fought under the excuse of religion, right through the Crusades, than for any other reason. Yet basically all wars have been fought for material and territorial gains. So when we are sending the troops to war, when the clergy is blessing the guns and the troops, where are we going wrong? There is no permission by the Almighty for us to kill. So either we don't speak the same language, or different things, different teachings have different interpretation to us, but somehow we'd have to sort ourselves out and convince each other that by killing we do not accomplish anything, and certainly not a way to solve problems. That is what I believe I can achieve in Courage to Care. And when I read some of the comments, the feedbacks, and find that every now and then we have managed to convey just this to people, that before the war, the whole thing wouldn't have happened, would it? If everybody would have spoken more about these things and trying to highlight, right, that killing people don't solve problems, doesn't make them go away. It makes a hell of a lot of mess. It's when you see two people fighting, and after they're totally exhausted, both of them, they can hardly stand up, and they just stand up, and they stop, and they just look at each other and say, look at us. Did we resolve anything? No. The problem is still there. The problem is still there, and that's what made me wanting to try to talk common sense, because this is basically common sense. This is basically common sense. Don't do unto others what you don't want to have done unto yourself. Right? I mean, that's all summed up. Right? I mean, this is the very basic of our teachings, of our own teachings. Right? This is the rule. The rest of it is commentary. And that's what made me trying to get involved into Courage to Care. I could see that eventually, once we manage, and nothing starts and succeeds like success, you'll have to work on it, and eventually you will find a point. It's like sharpshooting, right? I mean, how many shots do you have to fire until you actually master to hone in on the one target? And once you achieve that, right, you get a source of satisfaction. When you get comments from teachers that, I feel that it has advanced my own professional skills or whatever, but you'll have to appreciate, it's a lot of common psychology goes into it. You'll have to watch the body language with the children. You'll have to watch, you have to realize the attention span of certain age groups. You'll have to make your presentation to suit the various age groups. You talk differently to 9 or 10-year-olds and to 14, 15. Yes, they will have different questions. Yeah, they'll have different questions. And it makes it very interesting because in the course of that, I have become aware of a number of issues. For me, it's been a learning curve because I have come to realize a number of human issues I haven't been aware of before. There are other ways to look at things in life than my own. Right? You learn to consider other people. Not even, I believe still that tolerating one another is the wrong expression. Tolerating means putting up with each other. No, I'll go one step further, and I feel that we'll have to accept each other for what we are, the way we are. There is room to live together, to coexist together. I do differentiate between good people or good person and a bad person. A certain religious or racial classification does not exist to me. They are not all good, and then they are not all bad. There are good ones, there are bad ones, and you'll have to accept them the way they are. If they are bad ones, see what you can do. Say it's not a matter of meeting them on common ground. Try to win them over to your way. And that is basically what courage to care means to me. Obviously, we do need a lot more people, and even at information meetings, it is up to us to project the right idea. And quite unexpectedly, you get a bigger support, a bigger rally by people. Once you touch, it is a subject which is deep down close to everyone's heart, even the hardest person. If you put it on a personal, one-to-one level, you do touch a raw nerve where you can get through to people. But it might take time. And you'll have to give your all. You really have to try, but it somehow can be done.